Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Stephanie Ramos. I am the events manager here at Internet Creations, and I'm really excited to have you all here. I see a whole bunch of people are still logging on, so get yourselves comfortable. But in the meantime, let's get to some housekeeping. So today's webinar, Become a Master Builder with Lightning App Builder. I will introduce our incredible speaker for today. You're gonna really enjoy him. But on the next slide, let's get to it. So just some housekeeping. I want you to save the date. We have an exciting Salesforce AppExchange demo jam that's happening on June 18th. And you can view that live at appdemojam.com. So that's at 1 p.m. East next Thursday. Check it out. We're going to be unveiling some really awesome new features on one of our applications, case flags, that I think you'll really enjoy. Now, the next piece of housekeeping is another save the date for our upcoming webinar happening at the end of the month with our 16-time certified Salesforce architect, Mark Budson. He's going to be talking about how platform events are for admins too. So you guys have been so incredible of wanting so much knowledge, so we're giving it to you. So save the date, June 24th, 1 p.m. East as well. Okay. Let me throw it off to our incredible speaker today, Benjamin Bratcher. He's one of our Lightning champions here at Internet Creations, and I'm super excited for you guys to be able to hear from him today. Hey, Benjamin.
Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm excited to present to you Become a Master Builder with Lightning App Builder today. As Steph said, I am a Salesforce consultant at Internet Creations. I am actually based in Dallas, Texas. A few fun facts about me: I actually perform as an actor on the side in addition to my work as a Salesforce consultant. I love to ride my road bike, and I grew up in Germany. On the bottom there, you'll see my Twitter handle and LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me, it should be in the chat as well. Please do so. I'd be happy to connect.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. So we want you to ask questions throughout the entire webinar. I already see some questions coming in, so I think that is fantastic. And let's test this out. So it's right there in the GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see the questions box. Where are you calling, or where are you tuning in from? I'm sitting here in my home, as you can probably tell behind me, on the Jersey Shore in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. And our offices are located, we have two offices, one in the Dallas, Texas area, and our home office is in Hamilton, New Jersey, which is right outside of Trenton, the state capital, if you're not familiar with the state of New Jersey. So Benjamin, I see some people already telling us where they're calling from, and there are lots of people from Texas, Northern Virginia, Tennessee. Texas is in the house, repping strong. I like
That's
that,
right.
Benjamin. Canada, Chicago, Montreal. Wow, this is fantastic. Nashville, Stockholm, Sweden. That's amazing.
Awesome.
Hello, Georgia. You all are so fantastic. This is great. So you guys know how to use that question panel. I can tell. So make sure you ask your questions throughout. One of the top questions that we just got was if there's going to be a recording. Absolutely. So we're going to send that recording to you most probably within the next 24 hours, if not bright shining early on Monday morning. Yes, Monday morning. All right, Benjamin, back to you with today's agenda.
Thank you, Steph. All right, today we'll be talking about the Lightning App Builder. So we'll have an introduction to the Lightning App Builder first. Then there's two demos that we'll go through. The first being building a Lightning page, in which we'll build a record page from scratch. The second, dynamic forms and dynamic actions. And then we'll get to the conclusion and some resources, and then we'll open it up for the questions that you're already sending us, which is great. So in this webinar, we will be discussing some new functionality. So this is our forward-looking statement, or rather Salesforce's. Customers should base their purchasing decisions on products and services that are currently available. So please keep that in mind. Introduction to Lightning App Builder. So what is the Lightning App Builder? Well, it's important to note that the UI and the Lightning experience consists of Lightning pages, and those are made up of certain regions that contain Lightning components. So the Lightning App Builder is used to create these Lightning pages that you use in the Lightning experience. It's also worth noting that in the metadata API, Lightning pages are actually called flexi pages. So that's important to know if you do any kind of development work or maybe use CI/CD tools. And then lastly, I wanted to make sure you knew how to access it. So you can either go to the gear icon, click Setup, and then search for Lightning App Builder. Or if you are already on a Lightning page, you can just click the gear icon and then click Edit Page. So this is the Lightning App Builder, as you can see here. So under number 1, we have what's called the header. On the left side, there's a drop-down where you can access the 10 most recently modified pages. In the middle, you'll see the title of the page that you're currently editing. You can go back, whether that's to the Lightning page or setup menu, whatever you were at beforehand. And under help, there's some helpful tips using the new feature called tips that pop up while you're building. And it might give you recommendations like, hey, this section is empty. Maybe you should put a component in there. And then there's also links to Salesforce help documents and groups in the Trailblazer community. Under number 2, the toolbar, here on the left side, you have certain buttons such as undo, redo, cut, copy, paste. You can also change the format between desktop or phone. So you can design for both form factors. Here you can shrink to view or show it at 100%. You can refresh the canvas, that way you don't have to refresh your whole browser page. Also, make sure to save your progress, and then activation, that way you can activate it for certain apps or org defaults, and we'll go through that in the demo. Under number 3, you see your Lightning components pane. These show your standard, custom, and AppExchange components. Under number 4, this is where the magic happens. This is the Lightning page canvas. This is where you drag your components and build out your page. And then under number 5, that's the properties pane. So anytime you click on a component, it will show you the properties that you can configure for that component. So also very powerful tool there. So before we get into the demo, I want to make sure to cover some design principles that I think are important when building Lightning pages. The first is make sure to prioritize the most important information for your user. So you can do that by placing it in a default tab or accordion. Those are components that can organize your other components. Or you can do that by placing it in the main region, have it be front and center for your users. Another one is to customize the pages for your business rather than just using the default pages. So every business will use objects differently, even if they are the standard objects. So make sure to adapt your UI to whatever your business needs are. Next, make sure to design your Lightning pages efficiently to minimize load time and increase user productivity. Choose your template based on the prioritized components and how they will be used. You can also set component visibility, so that way the information is only surfaced when it is needed for your users. And lastly, make sure to design for mobile with micro moments in mind. So there is a difference between desktop and mobile and how you use that. So keep that in mind when you're designing for mobile. Mobile is often smaller, quicker tasks. So definitely keep that in mind. So why is the Lightning App Builder my favorite feature? Well, number 1, clicks not code. So this gives admins a lot of power. You can customize the UI and don't have to rely on a developer to code a Visualforce page like you had to do in Classic. So I really love that. And on top of that, you can get your creativity flowing. So by designing the UI, the world is open to you on how you want to do that. So you can get very creative with your Lightning pages there as well. Make sure when you migrate to Lightning, or if you're just new to Lightning, make sure to redesign the UI and your business processes to take advantage of features in the Lightning experience. And then lastly, you can extend the possibilities through custom components and AppExchange components. So not only do you have a lot of options with standard functionality, but there's so much more out there for you to use as well. So this brings us to our first demo, building Lightning pages. So our scenario is that Red Curtain Productions just started using Service Cloud. Our box office rep, Edna, is frustrated with the default case Lightning page. It's not really conducive to the way the box office uses the case object. So she asks her Salesforce admin, Jake, to customize the case Lightning page. And for your information, cases are used to field questions and or requests about tickets from patrons that attend productions at Red Curtain Productions. So here we are in the Service Console, RCP Service Console. As you can see, this is the default Lightning record page for cases. So you have your feed here, you have related lists, your details. So you could get by with this setup. You can still do your business and you have all the information you need. But as we said, it's not really conducive to how Edna wants to use her cases. So in order to optimize the experience, what we'll do is create a new Lightning page, record page for cases, and we'll do that from scratch. So let's go to the gear icon, setup, search for Lightning App Builder, and then click New. So this brings us to the Lightning App Builder. The first option that you have is to select the Lightning page type that you want to configure. You have options between app page. This is used as a one-page app for Lightning experience in mobile, often for internal or third-party apps. So think of it as a landing page, or maybe you have Lightning components that have a certain functionality, but it's not specific to a home or record page. So you would use an app page for that. Homepage, this is your landing page in the Lightning experience. So you want to put components that show someone's performance, like the performance component or dashboards, and then maybe some components where they can take actions, like today's tasks or events. So basically a landing page to then help them know where to go from there. And then record pages, these are used to show the user interface for certain objects. So this is what we'll be configuring in our webinar today for the case object. So we'll click Next and select the case object here as our object. And we'll want to make sure to add a label. So it's important here to have a naming convention in place for your org, because that way you or other admins or even future admins can easily identify what your Lightning pages are used for. So something I like to do, for example, is to have the object first. So it's for the case object. It is a record page, that's the type. And then we're configuring it specifically for the RCP console. So I'll add that in parentheses at the end there. So next we choose the template that we want to use for our Lightning page. You have two options. Either you can choose page template, which allows you to start from scratch, or you can clone a Salesforce default page. So you have a few options here, and it gives you the components that Salesforce gives you by default to start off with. So you don't have just a blank canvas, you have something to work with. So for our use case, and as you can see as I click the 3 regions template, it changes so you have a preview on what it looks like. So for 3 regions, I'm going to choose that because I want to surface different kinds of information in the console, and I think this will be the most advantageous to my design. Something to note is you can also create custom templates, however, you will need a developer for that. So once I've selected that, I just click Finish, and now I'm in the Lightning App Builder. So make sure to familiarize yourself with everything that we just went through in the screenshot. There's also a quick walkthrough if you click on this link, which is very helpful. So here on the left is the Lightning Components pane. So you have standard, custom, and custom managed. So custom managed are components that come from managed packages from the AppExchange. Under custom, you have components either developed by an in-house developer or from an unmanaged package. And then standard, these are the components that Salesforce gives you out of the box. So what you can work with without any other additional configuration. So what I like to do just for my own sake is group the standard components into different categories. So for example, you might have components like organizational components, which can include the accordion or the tabs, which will organize it horizontally or vertically. You can also have productivity components like the path, which can tell your sales or service rep what they need to do next as they progress the case or the opportunity. Or collaboration like activities or chatter, or functionality like the list view, for example. Or objects, record detail, related lists or related record, or analytics and automation like dashboard, only available on app or home pages, or flow. So you can launch a screen flow from the Lightning page as well. So what we're going to do here is configure the main region first, and I'll talk through the components as I add them and explain how they're used. So the first one that I want to add here is the highlights panel. So this is used to show you certain important fields of the record, and it also houses the actions. You can choose how many visible actions are there on this little configuration here. Right now I'm showing 3. The compact layout is what you have to set up to choose what fields display on the highlights panel. And then you have the case layout here, which is how you configure the action. So I'm going to open this in another tab and walk you through the page layout, because there is a relationship between page layouts and Lightning pages, and it's really important to know as you're building your Lightning pages. The first is under the field section. This is where you can drag fields into the case detail, and that way that field will show up. And that is used in the record detail component in the Lightning App Builder. Next, you have the mobile and Lightning actions. So you can drag these into this Salesforce mobile and Lightning experience actions section. And these will be the actions that show up in either your highlights panel, your chatter component, or activities component. And as you work with this, you'll understand which actions belong with which component. But something to keep in mind is that the order that they're in here is how they will appear in your Lightning page. And then lastly, related lists. So this is where you can drag your related lists and make them available in Lightning as well. And make sure to have a certain order in mind, because that's how they will show up in your Lightning page as well. And you can click the gear icon to select the fields that display in the columns on the related list, and the buttons as well. So that's really useful if you have maybe a new object and you want to display more fields than just the name of the object. I highly recommend customizing those related lists. So going back to the app builder, we'll move on to our next component, and that is the path. So the path has to be configured behind the scenes, which I've already done in path settings. You can select a pick list that you want to use, and it will progress them through. You have a button to complete the stage or the pick list value, and I can move along and show you some important fields or guidance for success. Next, I'll add the related list quick links. So this is useful to hover over, kind of like in Classic, and show you the related items for this record. So it's an easy and quick way to access those. Next, I'll be adding a tabs component. And as you can see, I just clicked the plus icon and clicked it here. That way I can add it rather than having to drag it over. So this is one of those organizational components. So I'm actually going to be changing these up because I don't want just related and detailed. I have a little bit of a different organization in mind. So the first will be the details, then the feed. Then I want to make sure to include activity, related. I like placing the entire related list on my page, but putting it in the background so that way it doesn't load every time the page loads, but it's there if you need it. And then another thing to do is you can put a custom label, and I'm going to put a single related list in that one. So also important to note is you need to make sure to set your default tab. So I want the feed to show up because that'll be the interaction internally, but also with the customer. And I think that's the most important part of a case. So under detail, let's make sure to add the record detail. So again, these are the fields that we just saw on that page layout. So that's how it's brought over into the Lightning page. Under feed, I'll be adding the chatter component. So here you can see different actions and the feed of the record so far. Under activity, the activities component, this will show open and closed activities. Related, I'll make sure to choose the related list component. That way we can see all related items. And then as I mentioned earlier, we want related list single here for history. And so we do have to make some customizations in the properties pane here, and that is to show the case history. So that way we have a designated spot to see the history of the case. So this is it for the main region. Let's move on to the left region here. So the left region is pretty important. You know, it's on the left side, we mostly read left to right, I'm assuming. So we want to place some important components here so that it's right there in front of you when you need it. The first here is case flags. So this is actually a managed package that Internet Creations offers. Case flags is a native app for Salesforce that enables you to monitor your organization's response times with cases at a glance via color-coded flags. Case flags provides real-time visibility to cases requiring responses from customers. So it's a really useful app for cases. That way you know when you have to respond to a case. And I'm setting a component visibility here because I only want this component to show up if a case flag is actually set. So I can do that by filtering by the field case flag age greater than 0. So that means a case flag does exist. And then next, I'm going to be adding a related record component. So this is going to be displaying information about the case. I've customized an action behind the scenes and setup called Case Overview, in which I've included certain case information that I think is really important, such as the status, subject, description, and others. So that way, despite the feed being the default tab, we can still see some of the most important case information without having to click in the Details tab. So that's it for the left region. Let's move to the right region. So here I'm going to be using an accordion. So this is another organizational device that organizes your components vertically. And I'll be changing this up a little bit. My thinking behind this section is that I'll be adding in components that show your related records for the case. So whether that's contact and account or related cases, or because again, we're configuring this specifically for the box office, I will also want to include components for performance and ticket. So that way Edna can see that information as she's helping. So again, we'll be using the related record components here. So instead of using case, we can actually edit the lookup field. And instead of using this case, we can select contact name. And that way we can add in an action for the contact. So not only does it display the information about that contact, but you can also edit it as well. So we'll do the same thing here with the account. So we can see the account information. Now under related cases, we'll be using the related list single component. So we already use this. However, you do have the option to choose your parent record. So again, I'll be choosing contact name and selecting the cases related list. So this way we're seeing the cases for the parent contact of this case. So that way, if there are any other cases that the contact has opened, we can make sure to see those. And the same thing with the account. So that way we can see any cases opened with the related account. And then if you are familiar with cases, you know that there is a default hierarchy, meaning using parent case. So I want to make sure to add that here and use the update case action so I can add in a parent case or see the parent case information if there is one. And next, I'll be adding in the related record component again, changing the lookup to be performance. So I have a custom lookup field to performance on cases. And then I also want to make sure to add another related component here. And I'll drag that in. And again, edit the lookup field and select ticket. So this is a custom lookup to my ticket. All right, so we've already done a lot of work, customized all three regions. I want to make sure to save my progress. Lightning App Builder doesn't save as you go. Make sure to save, otherwise you might lose your progress, which would be very unfortunate. So we're not ready to activate yet because I do want to switch the form factor here to phone. So as you can see, when it reloads, the left region moves to the top, the middle stays in the middle, and the right is on the bottom. So already realigns for you in mobile, which is really useful. But as you scroll through, you see our action here and then the highlights panel. Well, this information is kind of redundant. So I'm going to actually hide the highlights panel by adding component visibility, selecting device, and making sure the form factor equals desktop. As a side note, in mobile, there's a separate actions panel. So I don't need the highlights panel for actions in mobile, so I can easily hide it. So I'll move back to desktop and then click save again, because we just made those changes in mobile. And now I am ready to activate. So under activation, there are three options that you have. You can either set it as an org default, an app default, or specifically for an app, record type, and profile. And if you're not sure what the assignments are, just click this check your assignments button, and you can see all of the assignments that have been made for the object so far, which is pretty useful. Something that is important to consider, as you can see up here, is that the more granular you get with your activation and your assignment, those that are more granular will override the broader assignment. Meaning, as we assign this app default to the RCP service console, it will override whatever is selected as the org default. But if there is a different Lightning case page that I want to assign for a specific profile for the RCP Service Console app, that would overwrite our current one. So as I said, we'll assign this as an app default and select the RCP Service Console. Next, we choose our form factor. We configured it for desktop and phone, so we'll make sure to select that. But you could configure it only for one or the other. That can be useful if your phone configuration is very different than your desktop. It might make sense to have two separate ones. And then here we'll see the current app default, which is system default, and then the new one, which is the one we just created. So click Save. So if we did everything correctly, when I refresh this page, we should see the new case Lightning page that we've created. And voila, it looks like it worked. So that's pretty exciting. So before we move on, I want to give you a little tour. We've already seen a lot because we've configured it, but I want to show you here the Lightning path. If you drop that down, it will show you the key fields and the guidance for success as your service rep, in this case, Edna, moves along. The quick links, if you hover over it, it'll display, the quick links for the case team in this case. And you can also open that or view all, so it allows you to quickly access those related items. And then here we see the related information, related cases, and then lastly, performance and ticket. So if you looked at the description, this specific case is about the next to normal performance that Claire has bought tickets for. So I want to make sure to select that performance. Once I do that, it actually updates that lookup field. And then it also shows me Edna's ticket for that performance is ticket 2. So I can see, or Edna can see, the ticket price, $25 for that performance of next to normal on February 17th. So she has all the information she needs to give Edna an excellent service experience. And lastly, over here, the case flags component. As you can see, it's showing up because a flag is currently set. But if I click clear flag, this component will disappear because of that component visibility that we've set. So there you go. Now let's move back to our slides. So a few best practices to keep in mind to kind of summarize. Make sure to use default tabs and accordions. That way you can prioritize that important information and also have a better load time. Related lists need some special attention and love, as we saw. You can set related lists to load separately. That's in the user interface and setup. Also consider using related list single for the most important related lists that you're configuring. Also make sure to configure your related lists in the page layout, including the columns and the order that they're in. Don't display any components below activities or chatter. Those are feeds, so they tend to take up a lot of space. So anything below that will get lost. If you're new to Lightning App Builder, make sure to reference the tips available. Those are very useful, as I mentioned earlier. Make sure to configure the compact layout, mobile and Lightning experience actions to have the fields in the highlights panel and the actions in the highlights panel activities and chatter components. When you click on a component, make sure to look at the properties and configure anything like component visibility filtering that you might need. And then also, of course, design from both mobile and desktop in mind, as we did. All right, moving on. So this is our demo on dynamic forms and dynamic actions. As you know, this is a new feature coming in summer 20, which I'm pretty excited about. And so is Salesforce admin Jake at Red Curtain Productions. He just found about these new features. And so he wants to split up his record detail on the productions object and utilize field and section filtering. Doing so will provide more screen real estate to their users and also increase performance. All right, so here we are on a production record. In this case, it's Les Miserables or Les Mis, the production that Red Curtain Productions is wanting to put on in 2021. As a fun fact, side note, this is me right here in my production of Les Mis in college. I was playing one of the students, so I wanted to add that as a little Easter egg. So as you can see, this Lightning app is already configured quite a bit, but we want to make sure to edit it. So we'll click Setup and Edit Page. As a side note, you have to enable dynamic forms in the record page settings in Setup, which I've already done beforehand. But that way you'll get the option to configure dynamic forms and actions. So there's a new tab here in our Lightning Components pane, and that is the Fields tab. So this is for dynamic forms. You can drag a field section onto anywhere in your canvas and add in individual fields and build up your dynamic forms from scratch. So that is one option. The easier way is to click on the record details component, and then there's a new option to upgrade now. So if you click that, you will be met with a setup wizard for dynamic forms, walking you through what's going on with all of this. And so you just select the page layout that you want to take, in my case, production layout. There may be more consideration if you have multiple page layouts. And I'm not going to create an accordion by default. I'm going to do that manually. But then I just click Finish, and Salesforce does all the magic behind the scenes for you. So most of the heavy lifting is done here. And as you can see, your page layout has just been broken out into individual sections using dynamic forms. So I'll place the accordion in here, and I'll actually customize these sections. So I want the first to be labeled as fields. The next, I'll have a custom label, and that is a description. And then lastly, I will label this as additional fields. So of course, you can move your sections anywhere on the canvas. For my sake, I'm just going to keep it simple in the accordion here. I think the information needs to be loaded right off the bat. Also the dates. So it's important to keep in mind the dates of your production, ticket information, also very important. So that way, once you're in performances, you can see how many tickets are being sold, and also the financials. So you want to see what your budget for the production is, how much remaining budget you have. Under description, I'll be adding the production details. So this is the composer, playwright, and the description. That's a rich text field. So that can expand pretty far. So I want to hide that in the closed accordion. And then the system information, I'll put in this last one. It's important to note here that Salesforce automatically added the record detail mobile component. So dynamic forms is only available in desktop currently. So they added a component specifically to mobile. So if you're using mobile, you can still see the record details of your object or your record. So before we move on to dynamic actions, I want to show you a few more things. So the type field is pretty important, and I want to customize the UI behavior to make it required. So similar to classic page layouts, you can determine whether nothing happens, it's read-only or required. And then the cast size field, that's only really applicable if the type is musical. So I'm going to set some field visibility here based on the type field, and I want that to equal musical. So if it's a concert, concerts don't really have casts, so I don't want that to show up. And then lastly, ticket information is only really useful for productions that are in performances. So I will choose the production status and make that equal performances. So this is section visibility filtering. And also something to note is that in this section, you have the option between 1 column or 2 columns, similar to the page layout. All right, so now let's move on to dynamic actions, and you configure those in the highlights panel. So to do that, you just click Enable Dynamic Actions, and I'll do that again. I want you to watch up here in the highlights panel. These are currently configured in the page layout, but if I click Enable Dynamic Actions, they disappear. So I have to add in all my actions again. So I want to make sure to allow them to edit it, clone, change owner. Let's see. Submit for approval. I have an approval process, but I think that's only useful if it's not been submitted based on the approval status field, or if it has been rejected so they can resubmit. And I'll set this as any filter is true. So that way that action only appears when that is the case. So you can filter your actions as well. Similar with the delete option, I'm gonna set some advanced filtering here based on the profile. So here I have option between permissions, user, record, and device. So I can select user, go to the profile, and then go to the name and enter equals system administrator. So that way, the delete option only shows up if you are a system administrator. And then lastly, Printable View, that's only really useful if you're on desktop. So let's filter by device form factor equals desktop. All right, and so you can rearrange them here as you see fit. And there we go. We've configured our dynamic actions. So of course, we need to make sure to save, otherwise none of these changes will take effect. And you can see changes saved as confirmation. And now let's go back. So we'll go back to our production record, and all of the changes should already have taken effect. And I'll show you a little demo of the changes that we've made here. So the first thing is the type record, which we made required. But if I change this to concert, you'll see the cast size field disappear. So it's that responsive instantly. It doesn't have to refresh or anything. You can just make the change and it will change the based on your field visibility filtering. So I can see so many use cases for this. For example, you could have a checkbox and check that, and based on it being checked, an additional number of fields show up that are only applicable if that checkbox is checked. So that way you can limit the amount of fields on your page layout, or dynamic forms, I should say, and only make them show up if they are absolutely necessary. So there's that. Next, as you can see, this is not an approved production, so we want to make sure to submit it for approval. So I'll click the Submit for Approval button, and as you will see in a second, that button will disappear because it will be actively in an approval process, as you can see. And I've added some component filtering behind the scenes, so that way those showed up. And once I approve this production, those will disappear. And as you can see, the Submit for Approval button is gone as well. So that's to show you the filtering based on the actions. So let's jump forward a few months. Our production moved from planning and is now in performances. And when I mark this as the current status, I want you to watch this area here. As you can see, there's no ticket information, but once we're in performances, that ticket information shows up. So that's the section filtering that we showed. And there's confetti. Les Mis is in performances. How exciting is that? So this is the roadmap for dynamic forms and actions. Something to keep in mind is that this is subject to change based on Safe Harbor from Salesforce. And I've included a link to the roadmap in the resources, so make sure to check that out when you get a chance. At a high level, in summer 20, we're looking at dynamic forms in non-GA preview, dynamic actions in beta for desktop and custom objects. In winter 21, they're projecting to move it into GA for desktop and custom objects. Spring 21, they are planning to add standard object support. And in summer 21, mobile support will be added at that point. So a few best practices for dynamic forms and dynamic actions. Make sure to use tabs and accordions to organize your field sections. Also use your visibility filtering to only show relevant information. So whether that's field visibility or section visibility, that's going to be very powerful with this functionality. Keep in mind that you can also use filtering by profile to essentially only have one Lightning page rather than having multiple page layout, because you can control that based on the filtering in the Lightning page. So that is pretty exciting. You'll have a lot of filters, but you can control it all in the Lightning page. Keep in mind that there is special considerations if you are using both dynamic forms and the standard record detail component, meaning that when you add a field, for example, to the page layout, you'll have to also add it to the Lightning page dynamic forms section as well. So there's some double work there if you're using both. And also something to note is that related lists must be controlled on the page layout. However, they do have on the roadmap to add that to the Lightning App Builder as well, Safe Harbor. So at this point, let's get to the conclusions and some resources. So key takeaways. If nothing else, this is what I want you to walk away with today after this webinar. Lightning App Builder is a powerful tool for admins. Clicks, not code. You are given so much control of the UI in Lightning at your fingertips using the Lightning App Builder. So if you haven't already, make sure to familiarize yourself with it, and also make sure to customize your Lightning pages for the objects in your org. Also, keep in mind that you can redesign your business processes when using Lightning. So there are so many features in Lightning that are quite exciting that weren't available in Classic. So make sure to take advantage of that. And a lot of it is in connection with the Lightning App Builder as well. Make sure to design your Lightning pages to fit your business use cases. Don't just use the default pages, although sometimes they can work. Usually there's a lot more customization that you can do for your specific business. So make sure to capitalize on that because that's an easy productivity increase for your users. And then lastly, familiarize yourself with dynamic forms and actions because it's the future. There is still a lot of ways to go as we saw on the roadmap, but they're getting there. And this is, I think, the #1 feature requested by the community. So I'm very excited for the progression on these features. So these are some helpful resources, and we'll post this in the chat for you as well. I have included a few Trailhead modules on Lightning App Builder so you can get a little hands-on. Also the Salesforce help document on Lightning App Builder and the Metadata API Developer Guide for Flexi Pages. Also the Lightning App Builder Considerations article is very useful. There's some great best practices from Salesforce directly on how to configure your Lightning page. I've also included Be an Innovator. That's an initiative for dynamic pages, so you can get familiar and get hands-on with that. And then lastly, the Dynamic Forms and Actions roadmap, which is shared in the community in the Dynamic Forms and Actions Trailblazer group. So make sure to join that too. All right, at this point, I would love to open it up for any questions from the audience. And thank you for your time and attention during my presentation.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. So we have a ton of questions, so let's get right into it. So one of the first questions that we have is, this is probably a simple one to answer, is it possible to reuse text from a Lightning page onto another page?
Text meaning rich text?
It says text.
Text, okay.
So
I'm guessing text would be rich text component, which I didn't show. You did see that pop up based on visibility. So you can copy and paste that text, of course. If you're talking about the component, you can't unfortunately clone it and move it over, but you could clone your entire page. If there, for example, is a page that you have and you do like that configuration, you could clone it and then make your adjustments accordingly. But as far as I know, there isn't the ability to just clone one component and move it into a different one.
Great. Okay, the next question is from Ruth. Ruth wants to know, is it possible to embed a web page into a Lightning component, for example, using a UPS tracking a mobile version of UPS tracking?
Ooh, that's a very specific question. So in that case, I would point you to creating a custom Lightning component, which you can do if you have a developer in-house who knows Aura or Lightning Web Components frameworks. And that way, you have a lot more flexibility and functionality to display what you want in your Lightning components. Now, I'm not a developer, so I can't specifically answer that question about the web page, but I do know that there's a lot of functionality with custom components. So I would dig into that, and if we can, maybe we can follow up after I have a chance to talk to a developer to get more info on that.
Great. Okay, the next question is about back to your cases demo. Do you have to use parent relationships for what you were showing? Let's see if I can.
So in the demo, I'm assuming you're talking about the related records and related lists single components that I customize on the right side. And for those, I'm wanting to show information from related records. So yes, in that case, you do have to choose the parent record that you're referencing. You can use the case or whatever object you're on, but you're limited to only show actions for that specific case or single related list for that specific case. So you can reference the parents if you have a lookup relationship to another object on the case object, or a master detail relationship as well if it's a custom object. So for example, I created lookup fields to performance and ticket, so that way I could reference those to create those related record components. So there is some work, a lot of work actually I did behind the scenes to set that up. So you do need some kind of relationship with the other objects.
Fantastic. The next question is what drives the fields that were shown in the first demo in the related contact account? Is that a mini page layout thing?
Great question. So based on that, I'm using a related records component, and that actually is based on an action. So actually, if I can, let me just jump into setup here and I'll show you. That might make the most sense. So if you go to objects, so in this case, it'll be for cases because that's what I'm on. You can configure actions by going to buttons, links, and actions, and then click new action. And so I've configured the case overview, which is what I used on the left region. And so this is an update record action. So specifically, you must choose this action type for the object, and then you can edit the layout. And so this is where I selected the fields that I wanted to display in that component. And you can also have predefined field values if there's something that you always want to be defined when you're using that action. So you would have to configure this on all of the different objects. So I did this for performance, ticket, and then account and contact, I just used the default actions. So that was the behind the scenes work that I did to make that work.
Fantastic, thanks. Okay, so this one, I do think that you touched on it a little bit, but this Anders wants to know, he wants to use a list from a report and not the graph on a Project Lightning page. How can I do that? And if not, is it possible to use a related list and use a filter to only show related objects of specific record types?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if it's a record page, there's no easy way to just show the report, because you're right, it shows the report chart. If it's a home page or app page, you could kind of have a workaround and use a dashboard component and then show in the dashboard a report. So you would have the report in the dashboard. So that's kind of a way around it. But if it is specifically a record page, you might be able to create a custom Lightning component, but my recommendation actually would be to go on the AppExchange and search for CMTD Enhanced Related Lists, which is an app from the Salesforce Labs. And with that, you can actually filter your related lists. So like you were talking about, you could filter one related list for a specific record type and then the other for another record type. So that, I think, would be your best option in this case, to only show select related records.
Fantastic. I have one question and I lost it for a second. So let's see if I can re-find it before we get to the dynamic forms question. So this one was about translations on custom.
Yeah. Custom labels for tabs.
Yes.
Yeah, so
thank you.
From my recollection of the help documents, Salesforce only translates standard labels. So if you do set a custom label, those are not translated. And I would encourage you to read through that help document I shared in the resources and double check, but I don't believe there is a way to have custom translations for your custom labels at this time. But please research that and let me know if that's wrong. But I believe they only translate standard labels.
Okay, thanks. Okay, now moving on to some dynamic form questions. Is this similar to Enhanced Lightning Grid, aka Sortable Data Grid?
I'm not familiar with that. I'm guessing that's an app potentially. So I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with what that is. I do know I am familiar with another Lightning component in the AppExchange that kind of did something similar using field sets. So I'm sure there are other things out there. Dynamic forms is, that's Salesforce native functionality. So I would always recommend using the native functionality over custom developing in certain cases. Now, as you saw on the roadmap, there's still a long ways to go. So it might not make sense for your company or org to use dynamic forms when it's in non-preview GA until they add support for standard objects and mobile. So that's your decision to make. But unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that specific item. So
Okay. So are dynamic forms only available on the custom objects in the upcoming release?
yes, only on desktop and custom objects in summer 20.
Okay. A lot of people loving dynamic forms, but they don't have to use buttons.
Yeah.
Will dynamic forms make it better for us in the way that we don't need to use specific record types for getting fields to show correct for different types?
I'm assuming you're talking about having to have record types if you want your page layout to change, or to have a different set of pages, or sorry, fields display on your page. And yes, you're absolutely correct. With dynamic forms, you can just add a field filter for a specific record type, or even if you don't have a record type for other, whether it's a pick list field or any other field, you can reference that in the filters. There may be some limitations on the fields you can filter by. I would double check that. But yes, I think this will, once it is fully developed in GA, it will relieve that workaround that we've had to use for a long time.
Okay. So the next question is about, this seems a little bit more specific, but have you ever built a Google field type of component? For example, the search returns, if I were to search on my opportunity name, would that just be listed, or maybe the first 5? Is that something that's possible? Sounds like another custom component question.
Man, that's, yeah, I think that would be a custom Lightning component again. To me, it sounds like, if I understand that question correctly, you're wanting a component on a record page that searches through all other records of that object for a specific keyword. And yeah, that I can't think of a standard component. You might want to check the AppExchange, but off the top of my head, I'm not. I can't think of one that would do that.
Okay. Can you insert components between dynamic sections, for example, related record action?
Ooh, yes. Let me show you. So it's completely customizable. Since each section is essentially its own component, you could easily move it around and move it into its own separate section, or, like you said, a related record component. So if you look here, you can click plus, and then I can put in that related record component there. Now, in this case, I haven't customized any, well, actually for production company I have, so I can have the related record components there. So yes, you can move this around too, like if you wanted information to be on the top right. So it's highly customizable.
Fantastic. Okay, will dynamic forms and dynamic actions move inside of change sets so this can be set up in Sandbox and pushed up?
Yeah, great question. My understanding, based on the roadmap, is that so they have an item called packaging support for winter 21. So again, safe harbor, subject to change, but it does list packaging support in winter 21. So based on that, I'm not the product owner, obviously, but I would understand that they would support change sets in winter 21 for dynamic forms.
Okay. All right, let's get to the next question. So for dynamic forms and actions, can we also filter based on permission sets and permission set groups?
So you do have the option in advanced filtering to base it on permissions, but I believe those are the specific permissions. So I don't think it is possible currently to select a permission set or a group. When you click on permissions, it'll be like a permission like run reports or customize application, like the system permissions. So I don't think that is possible, as far as I know.
Okay, so the next question, is there an easy way to create a button for creating a related object where the relation is one-to-many on a specific area and not have a button at the top of the page?
So if it is a related record, you obviously would have to have an action as that's one option, and that would be on the top of the page in the highlights panel. Otherwise, depending on the relationship, maybe there is a related list and you can have the action on the related list and add the single related list component in a different area. But those are the only two places where you can really place an action, again, unless it's some kind of custom component that you create.
Okay. And I think, whew, all right, I think that we've answered mostly everyone's question. There were so many amazing questions. And like we said, if we, by chance, I'll look through after the webinar, but if we missed your question, we'll definitely make sure to reach out directly after the webinar. And we will be sending all the resources that we spoke about and I included in the chat. That will be included in your recording email, along with ways to contact Benjamin. If you have more questions afterwards, you can connect with him on Twitter or LinkedIn and get all your additional Lightning questions answered, because this was so great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And yeah, like Steph said, feel free to connect with me. I'd be happy to continue the conversation. And definitely check out those resources, because those are very useful, especially the Be an Innovator. It'll walk you through dynamic forms and actions, and you'll be an expert in no time. So definitely check those out, and we'll send out the recording along with that after the webinar. But please stay safe and stay healthy, and thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.